Yo people, so I've come across a belief online on social media recently, since this fight was announced, since Usyk versus Chisora was announced for the 31st of October on Sky Sports box office. I've come across a belief that it is not a pay-per-view worthy card, or not even a pay-per-view worthy card. The belief is that the fight itself, the main event, Usyk versus Chisora, is not pay-per-view worthy. Now, this inspired me to make this video because if you watch football, you'll know that during the transfer window, there's big money signings made for most teams. Most of the big clubs in the world will have at some point over the years gone out there and spent or overspent for a particular player. Because in football, a player's value is only what the club demands for him. So if Manchester United want to sell, for example, Paul Pogba, and they value Paul Pogba at 90 or 100 million pounds, then that is Paul Pogba's value. But Paul Pogba is worth whatever the paying club are willing to pay for him. So say if Manchester United are pushing for a £100 million fee, and Real Madrid come in and say they'll pay £100 million for him, and then they sign Paul Pogba Real Madrid, and people say, they've overspent. Paul Pogba isn't worth £100 million, but at the end of the day, the player is worth whatever the buying club is willing to pay for him. And essentially, it's the same thing with pay-per-view and boxing. A pay-per-view is worth pay-per-view if the person buying the pay-per-view buys the pay-per-view. So you can only really decide whether a pay-per-view is worthy of pay-per-view, or whether a fight is worthy of pay-per-view, once the event is over and done with, when the pay-per-view numbers are released. So for example, there have been pay-per-views in the past where, in the UK, where they've done less than 60,000 buys. And you could argue, okay, that's not worthy of pay-per-view because it did 60,000 buys. But there are other fights, like, for example, Dillian Whyte versus Joseph Parker was on pay-per-view, and I believe it done around 400,000 buys. Now, 400,000 buys sounds quite good for Dillian Whyte versus Joseph Parker. Neither of them at the time were world champions, both contenders at the time. And 400,000 people paid to watch that fight, which sounds pretty good. So my point is that whether a pay-per-view is worth it or not is really only down to, after the fight, how many pay-per-view sales they do. It's subjective. There's no objective way of judging whether a fight is worthy of pay-per-view. Like Lomachenko versus Lopez on the weekend. That was free for subscribers of ESPN Plus in the United States. Now, that seems on first glance as a pay-per-view worthy fight. So why didn't ESPN put it on pay-per-view? Well, they thought they might not have made enough sales, so they put it on ESPN Plus, which is a subscription service. So that's the point I wanted to make in this video. That the sentiment online that this fight isn't worthy of pay-per-view, where you can all, you can have your own opinion on whether it's worthy of being pay-per-view, but the only thing that really matters is the people at home paying for the fight. How many of them will pay for the fight? And Sky Sports and BT and ESPN and Fox, they all have projected numbers. They all have figures that they expect a fight to do, whether it's on regular TV or on pay-per-view. So if Sky expects this pay-per-view to do a certain amount of numbers, then they think it's worthy to put on pay-per-view. And if Sky think it's worthy of pay-per-view, well, that's really all that matters. The reason this particular fight is pay-per-view, just look at the fight. Oleksandr Usyk, the former undisputed cruiserweight world champion, moving up to heavyweight. He's fought Chaz Witherspoon in his first fight at heavyweight, which wasn't a great fight. Weren't the most entertaining. Chaz Witherspoon is not really on Usyk's level, so it wasn't particularly wasn't a 50-50 by any means. Dereck Chisora, on the other hand, is a veteran at heavyweight. Never won a world title, but challenged for the world title, I think, once. I think he challenged for the world title only once against Vitaly Klitschko. He's had 41 fights, 32 wins, and 9 losses, and he's 36. So at this point, Dereck Chisora is essentially a gatekeeper at heavyweight. But among the British public, he's very popular, so that's why the fight is on pay-per-view. The fact that Oleksandr Usyk, the former undisputed cruiserweight champion, one of the top 10 pound-for-pound boxers in the world, across the sport, is facing a popular British fighter in Dereck Chisora. That's why the fight is pay-per-view. Oleksandr Usyk, of course, has fought in Britain before. Fought against Tony Bellew in his last fight at cruiserweight, defending his undisputed world cruiserweight titles, and he beat Tony Bellew in convincing fashion. And a lot of people bought that fight, so a lot of people, especially casual boxing fans even, or just Tony Bellew fans, are aware of Oleksandr Usyk and probably would like to see him fight again. So yeah, people, let me know if you think, well, not if you think the fight's pay-per-view worthy, because I think I've kind of covered that. It doesn't really matter what you think or what I think. It only matters what the broadcasters think. But let me know if you will be purchasing Oleksandr Usyk versus Dereck Chisora on October 31st on Sky Box Office. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and turn on post notifications.